This is Janet Granger back with another episode of the Wildlife Wins podcast. I am so excited to have Tim Macklin here, who is the co-founder of the Collective Oyster Recycling and Restoration Organization, or CORR, as we're calling it. So, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Thank you very much, Jen. I'm very excited to be here. I love the podcast and excited to talk about our organization.
Great. So let's kick it off right there. Can you talk about what CORE does, who you are, all the things everyone would want to know about your organization?
Yeah. My name again is Tim Macklin, one of the co-founders. Founded it Core in 2023 with my co-founder Todd Kenke. And our mission is to operate a statewide shell recovery and recycling network in Connecticut. And so we partner up with restaurants, seafood businesses, seafood wholesalers, shellfish farmers to recycle shell. Basically, we try to prevent shell basically from going in the trash, and then we go through a process of curing, what we call curing, where it sits outside for about 6 months to kill off anything potentially harmful that might be growing on that shell. And then once a year, we take that shell that we've collected throughout the year and partner up with commercial shell fishermen. We load that shell onto their boats, and then they take it out to designated areas in Long Island Sound, and they plant, we call planting the shell. So they have a high-powered hose. They blast the shell off the deck. And we work closely with the Connecticut Bureau of Aquaculture. They're the kind of lead organization that determine where the shell will go in Long Island Sound. And then they also monitor the success of the shell planting.
Wow. Wow. That's so complex. All right. So what is the ultimate goal? Is it to help grow new organisms?
Yep.
Is it to help the environment? What ultimately are these shells doing when
Yeah.
they get replanted?
I'm first and foremost, the shell is a natural resource, so it's essential for oyster growth, and so our first main goal is to prevent all of that beautiful, important shell from going into the trash and ending up in landfills. And so that's our first and foremost. But then shell is extremely important. Oysters are a keystone species, which means they form habitat for lots of other marine species. And what happens is when an oyster spawns, you have a male oyster and a female oyster, and they have exo-fertilization. So basically, the females release an egg. Males release sperm. It's fertilized in the water column, and they'll lay millions of eggs, but only about 1% of those will survive. And to survive, the
Wow.
baby oysters, which are also called spat, they swim around in the top of the water column for about 2 weeks. They start to form their own shell, and then they sink to the bottom. And so if they land on sand, they're most likely going to die. They need a hard surface to attach to, and their favorite thing to attach to is old shell or even live oysters. So they'll attach themselves to that shell where they're anchored, and then they can grow into a mature oyster. So the shell is extremely important. Oyster reefs, we kind of like to compare them to like a coral reef down in, like, say, the Caribbean, where they're like kind of teeming with life. They're kind of the foundation of the habitat, and that's what oyster reefs are up here, kind of in the Northeast.
Wow. So basically, what you're helping to do is restore a keystone species to areas like the Long Island Sound, to help the entire environment from the fish to, I mean, the oysters themselves, of course, but everything else that depends on the life cycle of that environment.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah. So an oyster reef can provide habitat for up to 300 different species, anything from snails to crabs to shrimp. And so they create this ecosystem where juvenile fish can live and feed, and then larger predatory fish can come in and feed on the other, animals living there. So they really are kind of like an essential piece of habitat in Long Island Sound. And then the oysters themselves are just miraculous. They provide so many environmental benefits. So just in addition to providing that habitat, one oyster will filter 50 gallons of water a day. So they help pull out excess nutrients from the water. Their main food source is algae, and especially all over the country, especially here in the Northeast, there's golf courses. People like their beautiful green lawns, so there's a lot of fertilizer. which is nitrogen, which ultimately ends up in our rivers and streams and then runs off into Long Island Sound. And that nitrogen is the food for algae. And so you'll get, a larger production of algae when you have all that nitrogen in there. And that can be extremely harmful if you have too much algae. Eventually will die, sink to the bottom, and create a hypoxic environment. And so it's crucial to have oysters there to feed on that algae and pull those excess nutrients out of the water to keep it clean and just healthy for all the other animals. So that's one huge thing they do. When they grow, all over the place, they love growing in on the coastline. So they're essential in stabilizing the coastline. When the oysters grow on the coastline, they'll stabilize the sediment. So when there's storm surges or wave action, they help to protect the shoreline and the grasses that grow along the shoreline as well. So they're extremely important for that.
Wow.
Yep. The shell, like our ultimate goal is to get that shell back in the water so a baby oyster will land on it. But, not every shell is going to get an oyster landing on it. But that shell also is extremely important in helping to balance water chemistry. So as you know, a lot of our oceans and seas are becoming more acidic. And what happens is that shell is made out of calcium carbonate, and that will react with the more acidic water, basically balancing the pH of it and helping to kind of keep more balanced water. And all shellfish require calcium carbonate to form their own shells, and they need to pull that out of the water column. And so when you put that shell back in there, it slowly dissolves, creating, calcium carbonate in the water, and then they can pull that out to help form their own shells. So it's really, really important stuff. Um, and then there's also a thriving commercial shellfishing industry here in Connecticut. And, most of the restoration we do work, those areas are off limits for commercial harvest. But creating more oysters and growing more oysters, when they spawn, it helps the commercial industry as well because those baby oysters will land on their commercial lots, which they can eventually harvest. Connecticut, I think, is the fifth largest oyster producing state in the country, which people don't really know.
Wow.
Our main goal is habitat restoration and growing more wild oysters, but it also, by proxy helps, the commercial industry as well.
Absolutely.
Mm.
This is so amazing and so important in terms of what you're doing. So, what I'd like to do is share with listeners the success of what you're doing. Do you have some success stories you can share with us, or at least one big recent success story?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest number that we can share is how much shell we've recycled in about 2.5 years. So we started full operations in July of 2023, and to date we've recycled over 920,000 pounds of shell, which is almost a million pounds of shell, which is close to
Wow.
10 million shells. So and so that's coming.
That's phenomenal. That is such great. What a great success story in terms of what you've been able to do in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, and that was all going in previous to this, that was all going in landfills. So just getting that essential material out of the waste stream and back into Long Island Sound where it belongs. So and then we plant that shell once a year. The curing process, like I said, it's a minimum of 6 months, but we put the shell back in the water once a year in end of June, when the water hits 70 degrees. That's kind of what triggers the oysters to spawn. So we have a small window of trying to get that shell back in there. If you put it in too early, it could get silted over or slimed, and it doesn't create this, the ideal surface for the oysters to attach to. So we have about 2 weeks to transport all of our shell from our curing site, which is the picture behind me, which is in East Haven, Connecticut. And then we move all of that. We have a trailer. We take about 40 trips, and it all gets moved to the Bureau of Aquaculture in Milford, Connecticut, where there's a dock that the commercial boats will come up onto and will load to. And then we also transport some to some shell fishermen in Branford as well. And so the other number is, we've planted over 900,000 pounds. We've planted, over 500,000 pounds of that back into Long Island Sound to create habitat, which roughly covers about 80 acres of area. There's so much acreage in Long Island Sound. When you realize it's 900,000 pounds sounds like a lot, but then when you're out there in Long Island Sound and you see how big it is, you realize that for this project and program really to be continually successful, this has to continue on, indefinitely, hopefully. So long past, when we're gone, somebody will take it over and, we'll continue the process.
So along those lines, thank you very much for the segue. That was perfect. How can people learn more about your organization and maybe help if they get excited about it or just basically learn more?
Yeah, so go to our website. It's CORR-CT.org. And there's a great video right at the top there that kind of shows our whole process from start to finish. So they can learn more there. And then there's a lot of other resources and information on there as well. We're a small organization, really. It's just myself, my co-founder Todd, and then we have kind of a freelance part-time employee that works 1 day a week, helping us write grants. Right now we're primarily grant funded and donations, and so we've set up this great infrastructure and great system, but it costs money to recycle the shell. So assistance with operating costs is one of our biggest needs. Insurance, paying for fuel for our trucks, all sorts of different things. So that's a great way to help. If you're in Connecticut and you want to help volunteer, during the summer, we're really busy. That's when restaurants are producing a lot more shell. We also do a lot of festivals and events. So during the summer, there's a lot of outdoor festivals and events. And we'll set up, we have a great outreach table and tent. So we engage the public and try to educate them on the importance of shell recycling, oysters, and oyster habitat restoration. So, helping people volunteer to help, spread the word about that is always helpful. And even at these festivals, we could be recycling thousands of pounds of shell, and we have buckets placed all over the festival. So just helping us collect those buckets, empty them out,
Sure.
put them back out there is always helpful as well. So, people are interested in volunteering for something like that, they can go to our website and send us an email, and we'll try to get them involved.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. This has been so great, so educational, and oh my gosh, so important. So thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. And I'm going to encourage people who've watched or listened to this to check out other Wildlife Wins podcasts. Thanks so much. And
Yeah,
good luck with continuing with CORR. What a great organization.
Janet, thank you very much. We really appreciate it, and thank you for bringing us on the podcast. Have a great day.
You too.